July the 2nd, 1954. July the 2nd, 1954, it all changed. That's why we are in this auditorium tonight with the concerns we have. On that day, then Senator Lyndon Baines Johnson had returned from Texas after a hard-fought battle, running for the Senate, angry at two businessmen in this state because they had secular not-for-profit corporations that had been against him because they thought he was soft on communism. He returned to the Senate chambers as a bill to overhaul the tax code was passing through, and he inserted what has been called, the Johnson Amendment. It passed by a voice vote with no discussion. But the result of the Johnson Amendment is it put a speech restriction on 501c3s. There are 29 different categories of the IRS delineation of 501c, but the one in which the church falls is 501c3. Johnson's legislative aide, chief legislative aide, admitted later they didn't even have churches in mind. They were angry at two businessmen for their not-for-profit corporations here in the state of Texas. But the IRS seized the moment, knowing that now we had speech restriction officially on churches for the first time, up to that time, in 170 years of history, of American history, where there had been no governmental intrusion in the pulpit at all. And a cultural myth developed with a misunderstanding of the phrase, the separation of church and state, which has muzzled, chilled, silenced, and intimidated pastors, and even people in the pew mistakenly believe that there should be some kind of governmental restriction on what is said in the pulpit. We did not receive tax exemption as churches because we did a swap saying we would not speak on political issues. The churches are tax exempt because our founding fathers knew there should be a complete separation, the right definition, of the separation of church and state. And what the federal government can tax, it can control, and it can kill. Therefore, there was to never be, ever, any tax on the churches. They were tax exempt, totally free. Until the restriction came, the speech restriction came, and began to put a chill on pastors because attorneys and even the IRS itself is not entirely certain how to define the Johnson Amendment. It's not the first speech restriction that's ever been on the church. The first on the church was all the way back in the early pages of the book of Acts when they told Peter and John, do not speak of Jesus. And the way Peter and John handled that speech restriction then is how every pastor ought to handle a speech restriction now. No governmental intrusion in the pulpit at all.